and welcome to this evening's Empower Hour. We're super excited about tonight's speaker, so I'm going to go ahead and get right into some of the initial business we need to take care of. And now I will do the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge with respect as non-native people that the land on which we stand, live, and learn is the traditional territory of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples. Let us seek to understand what it means to be in right relationship today with the traditional stewards of this land and with this land itself and with all the creatures that inhabit it. And now I am pleased to introduce Bryan Hannegan, President and Chief Executive Officer of Holy Cross Energy, a nonprofit, member-owned electric cooperative utility providing electricity and energy products and services to more than 46,000 customers in Western Colorado. Headquartered in Glenwood Springs, Holy Cross Energy is leading the responsible transition to a clean energy future with its Journey to 100% plan aimed at obtaining 100% renewable and clean energy for its members by 2030. For its efforts, Holy Cross Energy was named 2020 Electric Cooperative of the Year by the Smart Electric Power Alliance. Prior to joining Holy Cross in July of 2017, Bryan was an associate laboratory director at the National Renewable Energy Lab, where he co-founded the U.S. Department of Energy's Grid Modernization Initiative and started up the Energy Systems Integration Facility, a unique distribution grid in a box, enabling utilities, entrepreneurs, and consumers to work together on a clean, affordable, and reliable energy system. Earlier in his career, Bryan held senior leadership roles at the Electric Power Research Institute, the White House Council on Environmental Quality, and the U.S. Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. Bryan holds a PhD in Earth Systems Science and a master's in Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering, both from the University of California at Irvine, and a bachelor's in meteorology from the University of Oklahoma. He currently serves on the boards of the Smart Electric Power Alliance and RMI, and is presently vice chair of the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association's Science and Technology Advisory Council. Bryan has also served as an elected director of the Coastside County Water District and was a former member of the California Council on Science and Technology. Welcome, Bryan, and again, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Mary, and good evening, Empower Hour friends. It's great to be back after a few years, and I'm delighted to be here tonight to offer you some insights into how that journey to 100% clean energy has been going. It's not often, as I was saying to our hosts at the beginning of the session, it's not often that one has the opportunity in their career to actually fulfill a promise that is laid out at the start of one's career. I think we're all too familiar with taking on aspirational goals that will be in place long after our tenure is done. I've been fortunate to be at Holy Cross now long enough where some of our promises have become reality. And I'm delighted to be able to share that with you today in the hopes that our example inspires others, but also informs the similar journey that all of us here in Colorado and throughout the West are taking towards our clean energy journey together. So here's an update so far. It's our experience with the energy transition. And as our members in our communities have asked us to undertake it, our clean energy journey is to be done in a responsible manner. And when we use the word responsible, that means honoring the time-honored role that electric utilities like us typically do, which is to safely provide reliable and affordable electric service. What's different about our journey at present is that we're adding a fourth leg to that three-legged stool, that fourth leg being sustainability. It's important to stress that for our board and for our communities, that no one leg is more important than the other. They're all co-equal in emphasis because no one cares how clean the power is if it's not available, nor do they care how clean the power is if they can't afford it or if it can't be delivered safely in the community. So we have to continue doing what we've always done, but add in a new layer of complexity, but also of challenge and promise by focusing on clean energy resources the way that we've done so far. So let me begin the presentation then by reminding you a bit about Holy Cross. Mary did a great job introducing us briefly at the outset. We are the fourth largest electric cooperative in the state of Colorado out of 22. We have close to 46,000 members, a little bit under 60,000 delivery points. That puts us about 1/20th the size of Xcel Energy. So everything we talk about tonight in terms of numbers, you want to compare that to Xcel, multiply it by 20, and you'll have your answer. One thing that distinguishes us, as you see in the lower left there, so far, year to date in 2025, 88% of the power that we've supplied to our members and our communities has come from renewable energy resources. That's more than double the 39% that we served in 2017 when I began my service as CEO of Holy Cross. Now, that's not 100%, and for a lot of reasons, I'll describe why this last 10 or 15% is going to be more difficult than what's taken us to this point. But it's an accomplishment nonetheless, and it allows us to begin to talk about the value of things like electrification with an increasingly carbon-free fuel. We're member owned, we're not for profit. So any margin that we make at the end of the year is either invested in the capital, the assets that we use, the poles, the wires, the trucks, the power plants, or it's returned back to our members in the form of a dividend to those members of the cooperative in proportion to the amount of electricity that they buy from us. So if you're familiar with REI and that bill credit you get back, that little card in the mail, that's REI is a co-op. Just like us, we provide bill credits at the end of every year for monies that we don't use to run the cooperative. Our focus is on, yes, affordability as well as reliability, safety, and sustainability. Our service territory is known mostly for the ski areas, for Aspen, for Vail, but it's also known for all the farming and the ranching and the rafting and the hiking and the biking and the fishing and all the things that make this western slope of ours so precious, with the great people that we serve. So our journey to clean energy really took flight in 2019 when our board of directors set at that point a very ambitious goal. To this day, we're actually one of only 6 utilities in the country with the goal of providing 100% clean energy by 2030. You hear a lot of goals around 2035, 2040, so on. And we respect the fact that this energy transition is at its heart an infrastructure transition. It's a transition of existing contracts, of existing power plants, of existing loads and users and infrastructures like grids and wires and poles and all the things. And there's naturally some capital stock turnover that has to happen over a long period of time for that to occur. For reasons I'll get into in a moment, we were in a very favorable position to help that transition happen more quickly. And so we took on greater ambition, in part to help identify the pathway to a clean energy future so that others could learn from and follow on in our experience and maybe even improve upon it. What you see on the screen here are the 5 pillars of our journey, starting on the left with the most important, which is to use energy efficiency everywhere and anywhere that it makes sense to do so. Not only does it save you money as a consumer or as an operator of a utility, but it also makes the problem smaller from a carbon standpoint. Because energy not used is fossil fuel not burned, it's emissions not emitted. And so, as my RMI colleague Amory Lovins will say, it's the foundation of everything. And so if we can use energy efficiency to solve some of the problem, we're already ahead of the game. The second, and probably the bulk of what we've done between the last time I spoke to you in 21 and now, is we've transformed our cleaner wholesale power supplies. We are an owner in Pueblo Unit 3, otherwise known as Comanche 3. We own 8% of that. And we realized straight away that as long as we were taking the coal-fired power from that unit, we wouldn't have any opportunity in our portfolio to add additional resources. There would just be no economic value in doing so. So we negotiated a short-term deal with another power provider that was looking to supply power in our region to create space in our portfolio to allow us to then go forward and generate new opportunities for new renewable energy resources that will survive us long after that unit in Pueblo is retired and put to bed, as is the plan currently by the majority shareholder, PSCo. Those wind resources, those solar resources are what helped us boost our 39% to 88% today, and we continue to look for new clean dispatchable resources at the bulk power system level, and I'll highlight a few of those in a moment. But it's not enough to just go get big stuff. You need some mid-sized stuff and you need some small scale stuff too. And those next two windows moving from the center then towards the right is where we augment the large scale grid supply with middle scale supply directly connected to our distribution network, because here those resources offer us not only energy value but capacity value. And moreover, they're closer to the consumers and the communities that we're trying to serve. And so they bring energy resilience value. They are the things that we will rely on in part when the bulk power system isn't available to us for whatever reason. And we can speculate on what that might be, whether it's weather or cyber or physical equipment failure or any other reason that there might be constraints on the bulk power system, the transmission network. Those distribution resources allow us to start thinking about local energy resilience. How do we use solar and battery storage to reach out to our first responders and say, hey, in the first 6 hours, you will be able to count upon having a certain amount of energy to power that first response, that important community function, that safe place for people to go. And so those local clean energy resources, both the new ones that we added on, but also the ones that we were continuing with our community solar projects, our existing hydro. We did have a biomass plant that operated for many years outside of the town of Gypsum for a variety of reasons, including economic ones. That's no longer with us. But then that has created space in our portfolio to go get other clean energy resources that have actually come onto our system at a lower cost. And when we take that concept still further, we now bring that down to the consumer level with distributed energy resources, rooftop solar, but also battery storage, managed electric vehicle charging, controllable thermostats connected to heat pumps or to air conditioners or to water heaters, to all the devices that consume and perhaps produce energy at the customer side of things. We have the opportunity to lever investments that our consumers are making for their own purposes and get those to help support the grid. In many ways, there's nothing that's more cooperative than that. It's neighbor helping neighbor when my excess solar on my rooftop is supporting the party that's being thrown down the street. Hopefully I get an invite. But those energy needs are being supported locally instead of maybe having to go to the grid to have to start up a new gas-fired turbine or to have to buy power when the market prices are high. These new installations can support locational value, energy resilience. They provide backup power to the consumer, and so that's worth a little something for them to pay. But the capacity and the flexibility that they give us in balancing our set of resources is something that we're willing to pay, and it actually makes the investment easier for the consumer to make. And then lastly, as we electrify all the things, I drive an electric vehicle and regularly am doing so up and down the I-70 corridor. And yes, I drive it because it's powered by clean energy, but I also drive it because it's really fun. And I can do lots of things with it. Perhaps maybe some that the manufacturer doesn't even want to know about. But the reality is that the value that electric devices provide, heat pumps that now can provide both air conditioning and heating in climates that unfortunately now have to worry about both, like mine, where I don't have a ducted system running throughout. I've got baseboard heating, but now the heat pump can give me both in ways that a traditional gas furnace cannot. Right? We can think about transportation mobility as batteries on wheels. right? We can look at a future electric bus, which has the same amount of battery storage that you would find at a hotel, and we can move that bus around to where it's needed if it's not needed to move people from point A to point B. We can look at heating and cooling. We can look at industrial processes the same way. And as you'll see in a moment, flexibility when you get to high levels of renewables is the coin of the realm. It's actually more valuable than the energy itself. And I hope to convince you why before we leave tonight. So all of these are strategies that we use to try to advance the clean energy future. And again, it's all done against the backdrop of maintaining affordability, maintaining or even perhaps improving reliability, maintaining the safety, and that means the human safety, but also safety from a wildfire perspective too, as we operate our system in new and different climates here on the West Slope. All of that has to be part of the challenge of operating a modern utility, and that's a challenge that we gladly undertake. So you've heard about our progress to date. In 2025, we're 88% year to date. We hope to get to 90% by the end of the year. I have to confess, we probably won't get there for a variety of reasons. But as we go towards kind of the back part of the year, we have more demand and less renewable production, so our numbers tend to drop. I will, however, point out that in the months of May and June, we operated over 95%. In fact, we hit a high watermark of 97% carbon free for the month of June 2025. So 10 years ahead of some schedules and 5 years ahead of our own. Pretty good stuff. You can see a lot of it's coming from wind, some from solar. We had the biomass, and that's one of the reasons why we won't get to 90, but we'll get into the upper 80s because that biomass is no longer there, and we've replaced it with some, but not all. But as you can see, we've got a lot of mix of projects from both the eastern side of the state as well as within our own service territory. And that remaining slice either comes from our own share of Comanche 3 or it comes from a slice of the XL system. And the good news is, as you see at the bottom there in the text, that even if we didn't add any additional resources ourselves, by supporting XL's energy transition, that slice of system that we get actually gets cleaner itself, such that we expect already with what we've done to be between 95 and 100% by 2030. But that last 5% is a bit of a doozy. And one of the debates that we will run into at every utility is, does it make more sense to spend $1 to try to squeeze that last little carbon out of the electric sector? Or should we spend that money in electrifying the buses and the vehicles, or electrifying the buildings, or plugging the pipeline leaks of methane natural gas, or taking some other action to improve natural gas efficiency? This is an energy system after all. It's not just an electric system. And I think sometimes in our policies, we focus on the things that are really easy to regulate. We utilities are pretty slow, pretty dumb by comparison to some other industries. But at some level, the most cost-effective carbon reductions ain't here anymore once we get to this level of clean energy concentration. So here's a couple of our new projects. On the left is our Bronco Plains 2 wind project. It's a 200 megawatt wind farm that we share with Guzman Energy, a wholesale power supplier of energy. When we need more wind, we actually get it from Guzman, in addition to our share of the plant, which is 3/4 of it, 150 megawatts. So it's really awesome in terms of a resource that is delivered on the XL transmission system that is supported by the Power Pathways project. And so that project was very helpful to us in getting that wind connected so that we could transmit the power to our consumers over here on the west side, which is great. And then on the right side, you see one of our newest projects. This is a solar farm paired with battery storage just outside Parachute. This High Mesa solar project is in partnership with AES Clean Energy. It's a 10 megawatt solar, 20 megawatt hour battery hybrid system. And the beauty of this is when it operates the way we want it to, we can throttle and brake the amount of clean energy that comes onto the grid in that very important Colorado River portion of our system. That allows us a lot of flexibility to store, to manage, to speed up, to slow down, to balance supply and demand in all places and at all times, which is what you absolutely need to do if you plan to keep the lights on for the people that you serve. So those are two really cool projects, and they're not bad looking either. Got to be honest with you. Love those pictures. I've said many a time that a responsible energy transition is not just solely focused on sustainability, but it's also affordable, reliable, and safe, in addition to being sustainable. And we're proud to be able to be one of the most cost-effective utilities in the state, if not the country, with a retail rate of 11 cents per kilowatt hour. It's a flat rate. There's no time of use to it yet, but that's something that as we look at how to create more flexibility and to move supply to where demand needs to be and vice versa. We're always looking at our rates and thinking about what's the best way in a fair and equitable manner to make sure that we're recovering the costs that we need to operate and deliver the power system, but that we're not collecting any more from anybody that we have to. With equity always at a focus, especially for those that are least able to pay any bills, let alone their power bill. We're proud of our system reliability. A lot of the money that we've saved by moving to clean energy supply has been reinvested in our system to make it more reliable, to make it smart, where we can now detect outages before you even detect them as a consumer. And before we roll trucks, we can actually limit the size of the outage. We can redirect power and switch it to get more people on more quickly. We can pinpoint exactly where the faults are and roll our crews exactly to the job site with the things they need to safely but expeditiously restore power. And you see that in our average number of outage minutes across the system and that 10-year downward trend. So too, investing in safety. Working safely but working quickly is a hallmark of what we do. And you can see that our work-related safety incidences are on a downward trend. Last year, we booked 75%. This year, we'll beat that. And so you can see it was a slow burn, but with the onset of the wind farm, we took a big jump in 2024, and we'll sustain that much, at least now, going forward as we move towards our 2030 goal. Not everybody is in the same position, unfortunately, in Colorado to make the kinds of progress that we have made. That doesn't mean progress can't be made at all. But each utility has their own circumstances, their own investments, and it's important to, just as we acknowledge the lands, the owners of the lands on who we sit, it's important to acknowledge that every utility is different and some of them may be able to move faster than others. For us, the flexibility in our contracts with Xcel was a great enabler. We're able to purchase power from others. Tri-state utilities until recently haven't had the ability to do this. Other electric cooperatives now have more flexibility in the tri-state contracts so that they can start to purchase more power from other people. Some co-ops have actually left wholesale supply from Piesco, from Xcel. Core Electric Cooperative is one that's gone its own way. United is not far behind, having left Tri-State and struck out on some deals. So you see more and more people using their flexible contracts to take advantage of the opportunities that exist in the technology space and what their members want to do. We had good timing. We moved early. And that would be my lesson learned from this is when you see an opportunity, take it. We didn't hit supply chain. We didn't hit COVID. We didn't hit inflation. We didn't hit tariffs. We couldn't get the projects that we got online at the prices that we have them today. We also locked those prices in at fixed cost for 20-year terms. So we will be paying the same amount in 2045 that we were paying in 2025. It's a deal that will actually get better over time as everything else inflates. We've got great partners in Guzman Energy. We've actually had a good partnership with Piesco as well. At the end of the day, if we can't serve our own needs, we pay Piesco to cover our back, to provide us with all the energy and the capacity that we might need. And as you'll see, that's gotten to be a little bit more difficult as we've brought more and more of our own resources onto the system. And then some lucky breaks. We invested early in renewables and we took some leadership on that, but those were higher cost resources compared to the renewables that we could get 10 or 15 years later. And so a good investment portfolio is constantly rebalancing. And we were able to do that with a couple of our legacy projects going by the wayside, creating some space in our portfolio to go get some new renewables at lower cost. So all of those things have led us to be able to continue to keep our rates affordable, even as we've boosted our amount of renewables. When you look at a utility profile, including that of Xcel Energy, keep in mind that their mileage will vary and that they'll have varying degrees of flexibility and capability. Markets help, transmission helps, partners help. regulatory and legislative guidance helps. For us, our regulatory guidance came from our board and it came from our communities. So having community support obviously is super, super important. And I know you all know that all too well. So this is what a clean energy future looks like. This is our hourly load shape for the month of July. I misspoke when I said June. July was actually the high water mark. And what you see in the colored areas are all the directly contracted clean energy resources that come to us. From the bottom up in the blue and the orange, you've got some hydro, the familiar solar peaks from the red up to the yellow. The yellow is actually exported energy from all of our rooftop solar customers under our traditional retail net metering program. The green is 2 shades of wind from our Bronco Plains facility. The darker green is what we have our own share, and the lighter green is what we are relying on getting from Guzman Energy as part of our partnership with them. The white space is what's provided as the residual from PSCO, from Xcel. And as I mentioned, that white space used to be a lot larger and a lot flatter, right? And they could pretty much consistently plan around us. Now they're basically our provider of last resort. So in many ways, we are the rooftop solar to their grid. And it creates some interesting challenges, but also some opportunities when they maintain capacity for us. But as you can see on some days, particularly towards the end of the month of July there, we're powering ourselves with our own renewables. In fact, many hours we're at or above 100% clean energy on a reasonable basis. And that's part of what the energy transition looks like. You'll see some areas where the green lines actually go above the red, which is our demand. And that's oversupply. So we got too much of a good thing. And as we add more and more renewables, that's going to happen more and more often. So what do we do with all of that? Can we send a signal to our consumers that now would be the time to top up their car or their batteries or run their industrial process? And we won't charge you anything for it because it costs us money to liquidate that to the market. Or do we sell it into the market where people are hungry for renewables at the right time? How do we manage that? How do we make sure that we have the capacity both from our own resources and from our partnerships to make sure that we can always keep the lights on, the so-called resource adequacy challenge? How can we manage the red line, which is the demand, to meet the colored areas, right? We typically think about managing the supply to meet the demand, but could we manage the demand at least a little bit to meet the supply? Could we send some price signals or engage people in programs that say, hey, we'll pay you a certain amount per month if you let us use your battery when you're not using it? And we can use that as a grid resource, and that may actually be cheaper for both of us. That's basically our Power Plus program for battery storage that we introduced concurrent with the onset in renewables that has been widely talked about and in some cases emulated. Market structure, what happens when we start transacting with a market that's not 100% renewables? Can we be 100%? The math ain't mathing at that point. So what does that mean? Are we foregoing the market opportunities, which can benefit our members, but at the cost of maybe sacrificing a little bit of sustainability along the way? And then how do we design for local energy resilience? We got a lot of wind, but it ain't where we are. And if there's a disturbance in the grid, we can see a lot of that green space then goes away and becomes white space. And we don't have enough local resources to power ourselves. And should we be designed for that? Or is there an inherent trade-off between the cost of doing a fully resilient, fully self-contained system and having the flexibility to gain the economics of a larger scale? So lots of trade-offs, lots of concerns, and all, again, a natural part of the energy transition. We continue to pursue our goal of 100% by 2030. You can read our power supply roadmap at the link that's here, and you'll have access to the slides afterwards. You see some of the elements that we're looking for right at the top of the list: virtual power plants, flexible loads, aggregations of distributed energy resources. I don't care if it's, a 5 megawatt battery at a substation or 1,005 kilowatt batteries at homes. I just need it to respond in the way that the grid needs in that moment. And then I'll pay for the privilege of having that grid service provided to me. The where matters. Will you look for opportunities for distribution connected solar in some of the areas of our system that are hard to serve by the poles and the wires? We're looking for replacements to things like hydro from the Colorado River system, which is increasingly challenged with every passing summer. and all the demands on the Colorado River for other uses beyond power generation. So maybe we can't count on that. We're a winter peaking utility. We have a lot of demand when the hotels are full and the lifts are turning and the snowmakers are blowing. So can we get some renewables in the winter months from somebody that maybe doesn't need them in the winter months? They actually need it in the summer more than we do. And so can we partner to shape those energy resources to serve multiple needs and find a way to get to market? And then ultimately, long duration energy storage, like I said, when the wind doesn't blow, we rely heavily on Xcel and its system, but we might also want to rely on our own local energy storage resources. And as we watch the technologies evolve in that area, it's worth asking, is it compressed air? Is it hydrogen? Is it a new type of battery? Is it a thermal energy network that's powered by hot and cold water circulating at depths and through our buildings, where if we have a little extra wind, we can heat up that water and store it for a less sunny day down the road. All of these things are creative solutions to solving that white space, which is what we're going to have to do if we want to get to 100%. Demand flexibility is going to play a huge role. My friends at RMI have been fond of saying that demand flexibility has a lot of different values, as you can see here. For a hypothetical example, we can take the blue dotted line, which is a typical load curve for a large utility over the course of the day, and we can preheat and pre-cool, and we can consume more at the time when wind and solar is plentiful, and we can discharge from batteries or reduce our demand later on during the peak times when maybe our demand for electricity outstrips the available supply. And we can bring those dotted lines down to the little green points there, which you'll notice is a lot flatter. And from an engineering perspective, our systems like to operate consistently at the same throughput. That gets us high efficiency, that gets us long life, that gets us low cost. Ramping, while certainly possible, isn't great for the fixed infrastructure, and we like to try to avoid it if we can. So all the things, air conditioning, water heating, managed EV charging, batteries, plug loads, you name it, if we can get it to be flexible, that's going to be the key to making that rest of our journey easier to obtain. I talk a lot about our journey in the same way that folks talk about, summiting 14ers, or I think about summiting Everest. We're sort of at base camp 4 and we're getting ready to take the summit. But as those of you that are in the mountaineering space know, it's that summit that's the most dangerous time. It's the most fulfilling, but it's the one where you have to rely on some things which may not have gotten you to where you are, but you now need those capabilities to get you all the way to the top. And that's what we're looking at when we look at demand flexibility. We have some experience with this going back to 2019, our first foray into virtual power plants. My engineers like to say we were VPPs before VPPs were cool. There are 4 homes at the low-income affordable housing project near the Basalt High School in the Roaring Fork Valley. We partnered early with the National Renewable Energy Lab and our Habitat for Humanity chapter in the local school district and county to demonstrate that you could power homes with a mix of distributed energy resources. Those homes could be more resilient, but they could also respond to the grid and provide a variety of grid services. And one of these days, I would hope that this becomes the de facto standard for building codes in our towns and in our communities, and that these are resources that we as the utility, we don't command or demand, we orchestrate and we encourage and we compensate and we try to get them to play together to make beautiful music like instruments in a band. And that we provide that connective tissue with the grid that allows them to do that in a way that is optimal both for the consumer homeowner as well as for the community as a whole. We learned from that process about the value of battery storage. And as I mentioned, we rolled out our Power Plus energy storage program not long after that. You can see on the right an example of where we're charging with renewables during the peak times, and we're discharging those renewables during the peak demand times, right? Charging renewables with renewables during peak production, discharging those renewables to help offset grid demand during the peak time or in the overnight hours where everybody's asleep but the wind is still blowing, as you can see here. We think we found a way to pair rebates and tax incentives and on-bill financing and value to the consumer for the backup power into one nice little package where in its heyday, when we had all the incentives working in the right direction, you could get a single Powerwall unit deployed for $15 a month added to your bill. And at the end of the 10-year life, that battery was yours. We'd probably have a better technology for you at that point. But that lease to own program with zero money down, 0% financing, takes away the concerns around storage being an equity play. We can make it available for multifamily dwellings. We can make it available for low income folks. We can make sure that everybody benefits equally from the energy transition, which is a really laudable and very important goal. We can do the same thing when it comes to electric transportation, right? Batteries on wheels, whether they're big buses or whether they're personal passenger vehicles or anything in between. We made a commitment to make sure that every community that we serve had at least one level 3 fast charger in that community so that you would never be far away from a quick top off if you needed it. Supplement that with our desire to hand out level 2 chargers for free to any Holy Cross member that wanted one, maximum of 2 for your home or 4 for your business. We would even help you finance and set you up with a local installer to help put those free chargers into service at your home or your workplace. Again, the idea is take away the notion of range anxiety. Take away the upfront costs of building the infrastructure so that when you're buying a car, you make the decision the way that you always make a decision. Do I like the car? Is it fun? Can I afford the payments? Is it more cost effective, this model versus that one? And hopefully that encourages you to, when you look at the life cycle costs of driving electric, that encourages you to consider an EV as your next car. And I'm proud to say that Pitkin County and Eagle County are some of the most EV dense locations anywhere in the Western United States. We might have had a small part to play with that, but I think the general ethos towards carbon free has also helped quite a bit. I will point out that at an 11 cent per kilowatt hour retail rate, that's functionally equivalent to driving at $1.10 per gallon of gasoline equivalent for a 40 mile per gallon gasoline internal combustion engine. I don't know about you, but I had color in my hair the last time I saw $1.10 on the gas pump. And I doubt that we'll see that anytime soon. So it's a pretty good screaming deal and one that we hope all of our members will take advantage of. We supplement all of these technology things and these power supply things with programs and incentives and rates, whether it's on-bill financing for distributed resources, whether it's paying our members for the capacity that their DERs will provide in exchange for getting the ability to manage those assets, whether it's the rate of charging of an EV or the rate of discharging from a battery. It's allowing people to sign up to save $1 or $1.50 per kilowatt hour that they don't use during the peak times of the month where we think we're going to be straining our system to the maximum. That's 10 to 15 times more than they would pay to use that kilowatt hour in that period of time. So that's a great way for those who are concerned about their bill to knock out a lot of that bill in a short order, right? You get the text message, you curtail your usage, you get paid. It's not any more complicated than that. We have optional programs for people that want to use the time of use rate to help arbitrage, buy low, sell high, right? Charge up your battery in the morning at 6 cents, discharge it to us and get paid 24. It's worth it for both them and for us. And for those that are still not happy that we're not at 100% by yesterday, we have our Pure program that allows people to chip in more to fill up the coffers so that we can go and get more of those renewable projects, especially the higher cost ones that sit exactly in our community where land costs a lot more and labor costs a lot more. But if you want it here, you can help us out by signing up to our Pure program, grossing up from the 88 that you get already to the 100% with a little bit extra. And that gives us the bit of the kick in the pants that we need and the capital that we need to go further faster with your help. So that's a lot of stuff all moving at the same time, but The net effect is we've been able to make progress on the energy transition in a way that has preserved that affordability, that's improved our reliability, that's enhanced our safety. I haven't even talked at all about what we're doing with regards to wildfire mitigation, but that smart grid has allowed us to do a lot of the things for many, many years that you're now hearing about in the programs that are rolling out from others at the Public Utilities Commission and more broadly across the West. Whether it's smart protection settings, whether it's drones and satellite data helping us zoom in on vegetation management risks or equipment about to fail so we can fix it before it does. All of those investments have been motivated by and funded by the ability that we capitalized on to transition to clean energy at a lower cost. Does that exist today? Maybe not right now. But anybody who's in the utility space knows that there's always a train leaving. Even if I missed the last one, there's a new train coming in. And at some point, our markets will rebalance. The tariffs either will be or they won't be. Maybe we'll get some tax incentives again. The technologies will inevitably continue to improve anyway, regardless of whether we do anything or not, as we deploy more. So there's always opportunity in the space. And I would say to those that are pushing the clean energy journey like we are, keep at it, be patient, pick your spots. Sometimes we can make progress in a big way, like we have at Holy Cross. Sometimes it's just about holding the line and waiting for that next opportunity. But being ready to use this time to get ready so that when that next opportunity presents itself, we're ready to capitalize on it in the narrow window that inevitably will be there. So it's been a delight to be back. I look forward to the questions and the conversations. Again, it's very gratifying for me and for the entire team here to say we set a mark and we're actually doing it. And in the frame of a 4 to 5 year period, which those of you who know utilities, that's like warp speed. So it just goes to show that change can happen.
Great. Thank you, Bryan. Really appreciate that informative and even more inspiring presentation on how you said you'd do it and now you're doing it. So it's a little bit like Babe Ruth pointing the bat over the fence. We can see that ball arcing high into the bleachers. So congratulations, and we'll start asking some questions that have been posted in the Q&A. And let's see, I'll go to the top here. And this is Stephen Kushner. He says, hello, Bryan. Being a leader in clean energy, are you working to create more virtual energy plant opportunities so consumers can store energy when they install PV panels? Also, do you see issues in the region when developers are considering large housing projects but don't plan or design with energy conservation or renewable power in the building designs?
Yeah, Stephen, that's a great question. And I'm so glad that that's the first one out of the box. Um, Developers of projects are going to develop to the market that they're wanting to sell into. And I think we as consumers have a tremendous amount of power to say, number one, where do we want to live and how do we want those places to be powered and energized? But I also think our local elected leaders, those that set the building codes and standards, those that do the zoning, those that allow for responsible development, have a lot to say too about what kinds of development they're willing to host in their communities. A lot of our challenges with building codes and standards and with deployment of distributed energy resources have frankly come because either the developer isn't familiar with the technology, doesn't have access to someone that can capably install and maintain the technology, hasn't had the experience to be able to trust it so that it will deliver the kind of customer experience, frankly, that people want when they buy a new home or a new place to live. Or they're just unaware of the opportunities that are provided by utilities like Holy Cross through programs such as our Community Energy Systems program, where we actually will pay for a large-scale development to electrify by not charging them for the utility upgrades that are needed to make that happen, right? part of what we heard was, well, we can't serve that much electricity because your system doesn't have the capacity to do it. Balderdash, our system has plenty of capacity. And by the way, we can make more if we know that the project's coming in advance. We can procure the transformers, we can lay the ground wire, we can build all the infrastructure to get there, provided that we have knowledge in advance. And I think the biggest challenge comes when the developer turns to us in the 11th hour and says, the Planning and Zoning Commission has told me to make this all electric. What do I do now? And I'm like, bro, your building is already constructed. There's actually not a whole lot that we can do. So I would say it's one part building community, one part codes and standards, and then one part the utility being proactive and saying, look, we want to remove ourselves as a barrier to electrification because that helps us achieve environmental outcomes with our clean energy supply. But it also allows us to, frankly, sell more electricity. And that's kind of what we do. So no issues. I will say, and it's a little bit of an unpopular opinion, but the state's retail net metering program, I think, is beginning to have outlived its usefulness. I recognize that it's an important driver of solar economics, but I think it creates some unintended consequences in that we end up having solar systems that are not optimized for the buildings that they're sitting on. There's no incentive to pair those solar systems with battery storage to minimize the throughput to the grid. And so you then end up having grid upgrades needed because you're trying to maximize that net metering revenue, and rightly so. We don't begrudge anybody that, and we love the solar. But I think rethinking how some of our old legacy policies for promoting renewables and distributed resources in a world where we want the buildings to be more interactive, the vehicles to be more interactive, that's a conversation that I would love to have with everyone's feathers down and more of a problem-solving mindset than maybe we've had in the past.
Great, thank you, Brian. And here's our next question. It's from Moji Agha. It says, hi, and thank you, and thanks for this webinar. Here in the Boulder area, we are restarting the municipalization of Xcel. What does Empower Our Future and Holy Cross Energy think about our collaborative deprivatization movement building? I think that's an interesting question. Just on behalf of Empower Our Future, interested in learning more about that. But I couldn't say more on behalf of Empower Our Future. And Brian, I don't know if you're even aware.
So very much aware of the concerns and the challenges that the folks have raised from time to time about Xcel. To be completely blunt, we had many of those same concerns leveled at us by the city of Aspen not too long ago. The concerns of one's consumers are always concerns that I think we should be listening to, we as utilities. At the end of the day, we exist to serve you. And I think that mindset is not immune to just co-ops and municipal utilities. I think investor-owned utilities can and do have that same mindset as well. It's important to understand, though, what drives their incentives and their investments and what they're seeking to do and accomplish, and to figure out a way in which you can align your community objectives with that. I don't want to speak to whether the municipalization is good or bad or otherwise. I will acknowledge, though, that Xcel has done a lot of work to advance its clean energy future, just as we have. And in fact, we've exchanged a lot of notes on how to do that together. And as a wholesale customer of theirs, not a retail one, we heartily support their effort at any time we can get there. Have we had our beefs? Absolutely. But I believe that the best way to address those is to engage in that conversation and do what's right for the community and what's right for the people that you're trying to serve.
Great, thank you, Brian. And next question is from Alan Best. How much of the experience of Holy Cross Energy can be translated to other electric utilities? And what are the limitations? And then there's a follow-up after that.
Yeah, I see the follow-up on the screen, so I'm going to start with that one first, actually, Steve,
Let
if
me
I
read
might.
that just so it goes into the
Yeah.
recording. An overlapping question is, how can Holy Cross Energy achieve its penetration of renewables without the backup of natural gas that Platte River, United Power, Xcel, and others have decided will be necessary to keep the lights on?
Yeah, Alan, as usual, goes right to the critical question, which is how much is enough? The white space in that chart that I showed you with all of our resources, that comes from the regional grid. That regional grid is overwhelmingly driven by natural gas. And so when we look at that white space on our chart, we have to acknowledge that we are supported by and saved in many ways by the natural gas resources that are out there providing that last little bit of energy and a lot of the resource adequacy that's out there. To honor our commitment to making sure that our transition is responsible and that it's affordable and reliable and safe, it is incumbent upon us not to abandon those important resources until we have an alternative that can operate with renewable energy resources that provides the same, if not better, services that those natural gas resources and that the Western Colorado and Colorado grid provides. That is a critical question that we are the first ones to encounter head on, but we certainly won't be the last. It's not possible the way that electricity flows on the grid to say any one particular company's asset is saving, the grid here or there or anywhere. We're sort of all in this together, and it's a diversity of resources that are going to be needed to get us to our goal. I think the same techniques that we've applied, whether it's efficiency, large scale renewables, distribution connected renewables, distributed energy resources, electrification, those same 5 steps are common to the journey that all of us will be taking as utilities seeking a clean energy future. Each of us will have a different ability to implement each of those 5 steps. And so we may not be able to go as far as the next guy or gal. And I think that's where it's really important to understand the specifics of Xcel versus a Platte River Power versus a United Power. And we are always sharing our lived experience and offering our advice and, frankly, learning from our cohorts in the state and throughout the West.
Great, thank you, Brian. The next question is from Leslie Glustrom. Thank you, Brian, for the inspiration. Please discuss your contract with Gooseman, the strengths and weaknesses, and whether you would recommend Gooseman to other communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Guzman Energy is a wholesale power supplier. They're basically a broker, if you will, for power supplies on a variety of grids, not just the Western grid, but other markets as well. They play a very important role in managing our day-to-day imbalance, just as you might have a market like an SPP managing an imbalance. Somebody's got to participate and represent you in that market, and Guzman does that for us. But more importantly, they're a partner with us on a number of projects. They are taking our share of Comanche 3 so that we have space in the portfolio to bring on other things. They're partnered with us in taking a share of the Bronco Plains 2 wind farm and feeding some of that back to us when we have the appetite to do it, which is hugely important, as you saw from our colored bar chart. And they supply us other renewable energy resources from their portfolio, in addition to Bronco Plains 2, when they have that power in excess. In fact, we only this year are only accepting renewable energy from Guzman and nothing else, right? So the white space is the remaining fossil in our portfolio, and that's what allows us to get to a very high level of resources. Could it be another wholesale supplier, an Invergy or a Tri-State or even an Xcel? Yes, absolutely. And I think these kinds of wholesale retail relationships are vitally important because I think about what it would take for us to try to do it with only our own resources, only in our footprint, only in our local level, and that inevitably would be more costly and less reliable than relying on a much larger grid with its resource diversity and its economy of scale. So I think it's a very important relationship.
Great, thank you, Brian. And the next question is from Laurel Supple. Rural electric cooperative utilities are notorious for taking a small c conservative stance on the energy transition, mostly resisting adoption of renewable energy and being less subject to strong arming from regulators or state legislators. Beyond your own expertise and enthusiasm for renewable energy as a former NRELian, are there any structural characteristics or strategies that makes Holy Cross stand out from the other rural electric cooperatives in this area, in this arena? And how do you think those of us passionate about expanding access to clean and reliable energy can accelerate the adoption of these strategies in other rural electric cooperatives across the country?
That's a great question, Laura. And I think I'll start by saying I think rural electric cooperatives generally, they've got a little bit of a bad rep, to be fair. They're often seen, and I saw this earlier in my career, as kind of that's the way we've always done it crowd. And I think what you have to do is engage in the conversation that rural electric cooperatives live by, right, from and within their members and their communities, to redefine the way you've always done it to the way you're going to do it going forward. I could have sat back and said, okay, well, we're going to be 40% and we're going to stay with what we got and we're going to trust the process and off we go. Had we done that, we would have had much higher costs for our wholesale power supply. We would be relying on an asset which, last time I checked, hasn't functioned in a while. And we'd be looking at a lot higher costs and maybe less reliability going forward. So I think part of the opportunity is to actually engage the leaders of those rural electric cooperatives, many of whom are amazing individuals. I know this from my service on the council for the National Co-op Association. There's incredible innovation going on in AI and in vegetation management and in operating distribution systems and, yes, in power supply. Every single co-op in the state of Colorado has an 80% or better target for clean energy right now. Now, a lot of them are getting it through Tri-State. Fair enough. Take victory where you can see it. Those that aren't Tri-State members, they've also got a clean energy plan. And they're going to go there and they're going to get there and do it, because that's one of the hallmarks is when we say we're going to do something, we're going to do it. And I think it's, getting in and having the conversation with the leadership of the cooperative, with the leadership of the board of directors, and showing them how an energy transition doesn't have to be one, at least in its early stages, it doesn't have to be one that's comprised of trade-offs. I got to trade affordability to get more renewables. Well, our example definitely showed that wasn't the case. And even today's costs are still on par with what a gas turbine with natural gas at current prices is going to be, let alone a small modular reactor or a new coal plant. If you've seen the prices lately, everything's more expensive. And even without the tariffs, I've got solar installers saying their business is going like gangbusters. So I think that if you're passionate about expanding access, go and have the conversation at the annual meeting, talk to the board directors, share the examples that you know of where you can have it all. And then, like I said, be patient and pick your spots, because I think the opportunities will be out there.
Great, thank you. And that's very encouraging for those of us who are interested in what rural electric cooperatives are up to, and especially here in Colorado.
Thanks, Steve. I'll take over the questioning for now. And folks, remember, it is after 7. It's after dinner time, so I'm going to try to be judicious with the questions. But I'll especially get to the ones that are live in the chat here, and then there was several that were emailed in. Okay, from Tracy Burnett, we have, thanks, Bryan, for the presentation and your leadership on showing the way to a sustainable future. What are the barriers to VPP deployment?
So added cost, particularly of the upfront variety. One of the early lessons that we learned was, even by handing out level 2 EV chargers, we said, hey, get this installed, and once you're hooked up, you'll be in our program. We'll start giving you bill credits. A lot of these EV chargers sat on the garage floor.
Yeah.
We followed up with folks and said, so what gives? How come you're not installing the free stuff that we gave you? They said, well, I don't have the $1,000 for the electrician to come and do the wiring. Right. So we said, all right, well, let's do on-bill financing for that with no money down so that we can get these EV chargers put in place. And sure enough, we started seeing them get installed, and that gives people the opportunity to drive electric. So I think the upfront capital cost of investing in something new, I mean, you already pay for the grid. Now you're going to pay for something on your rooftop or in your garage that's going to be a second energy system. So there's naturally some added costs. But I think when we are able to be creative and pair that with utility programs that lessen our need for traditional grid services, we can make up that difference in cost with utility payments and help make the economics much more favorable.
Were there any other lesson learned about giving things away for free that weren't utilized and evolving the program to help it increase increase the usage?
Well, not so much about giving the stuff away free, but what we realized too is that people were also going and getting their own distributed resources that maybe didn't speak our language, right? There's a lot of, VHS and beta for those of you of a certain age, where if you can speak one but not the other, then you necessarily are leaving some consumers out of the deal. So I think as an industry, we have an opportunity to engage in standard setting and interoperability that would allow me to not care whether it's a Sonnen battery or an LG battery or a Tesla battery, just to name a few. If it's a battery and I can communicate with it, then I can get what I need from it and I can pay it for its trouble. Like I'd love for that to be the case for all distributed resources. That's what allows the VPP to scale now, because then I don't have to go out and recruit customers. They'll recruit themselves by plugging in that device and going to the Home Depot and getting the new heat pump, and it kind of takes care of itself. So
Yeah, cool. And a related question that was emailed in related to VPPs is vehicle to X, vehicle to grid, vehicle to home, vehicle to load. Um, from Excel's perspective, they don't have specs for vehicle to home. Everyone's kind of waiting for it. How does Holy Cross approach vehicle to anything services?
So we've been very open and not secret about our desire to have bidirectional charging, which is the other way to say V to whatever. Because honestly, once it's V2, it can go wherever it wants to, right? So that's why that we think about the bidirectional charging. We want to be able to charge the vehicle, but we also want the vehicle to discharge to the grid. And then in that case, it's basically a connected battery. And we think about it in the same way as a battery that's affixed to a wall. This just happens to be affixed to the charging station at that point. And so as long as that charging station has the ability to be influenced and communicated with by us, then all of our things for stationary storage can apply to mobile storage when it's connected and able to provide the grid services. So it's probably not as big of a deal as we're making it out to be. But I understand Excel's had some difficulty with the V to whatever. We'd like to think it's a big part of our future, and we're trying to work to make it happen.
Cool. Thank you for that. I'll continue on the questions here. A question from Leslie Glistrom. Wondering if Holy Cross Energy has looked into thermal batteries as provided by Rondo and others.
We've not looked into the thermal batteries provided by Rondo, but and other. I know that other cooperatives, Delta Montrose among them, San Isabel is another one. They have these as regular consumer offerings, the same way that we would do the battery program. We just haven't prioritized that because of the nature of our need for grid services. The one thermal thing that we have looked into, though, and we're continuing to do so, is the thermal energy network for replacing natural gas for heating and for cooling purposes. We have a number of communities that are looking to wean off of gas service for building, heating, and cooling by creating connected networks of pipes moving hot and cold water around. And we think there's an awful lot of promise there, and we actually wouldn't mind taking a more active role in providing that thermal grid between customers, the same way that we provide the electric grid today. That offers long duration, large quantities of energy storage, which is why we think that might be a better fit for us than thermal batteries, which are more shorter duration and smaller size.
Interesting. And I think people, it's complicated. You hear thermal energy networks, you hear geothermal, ground source heat pumps.
Yeah.
Explain the difference.
So a typical heat pump is basically a reversible air conditioner. It compresses or expands air to change the temperature of the air that's entering or exiting the building. That's an air source heat pump. A ground source heat pump actually uses liquid fluid, water, which has a thermal capacity about 1,000 times greater than the similar unit of air. So you can move a lot more energy for the same unit of water. And when you use the natural 55-ish degree temperature of the subsurface of the soil year round, you basically have a wonderful insulator that keeps the grid at a constant temperature. And so when you inject energy in it, you heat it up a little bit, and some of that energy leaks out through the pipe deliberately into the subsurface and makes 55 degrees, 55.5, and it's stored there for a while until the water that runs back through is a little cooler, and then the heat exchange goes the other direction, and the water is now a little bit warmer than it otherwise would be in the wintertime. So it becomes this massive reservoir for power. And because you're now using water as the working fluid in the heat pump, it's actually a heck of a lot more efficient. And so that's the allure of the ground source heat pump. It does mean that you're digging holes and drilling stuff. So there's more of an environmental disturbance, and it's a little bit more costly. Well, frankly, a lot more costly. And that's what we're kind of working on.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I'm not sure if you expected to have to be the Wikipedia of all things VPP and all that. So thank you for digging in deep. Here's a question from RJ Harrington. How does HCE, how does Holy Cross define augmentation involving BESS and related components?
Yeah, I'm looking at that question and I'm not exactly sure how to respond or what it's referring to.
Yeah.
So RJ, if you'd be kind enough to maybe follow up with a little bit more detail, be happy to answer it.
Thanks, RJ. Yeah, if you just put that question down in the Q&A section, that'd be great. Okay, Fred Kirsch, thank you so much for your leadership and demonstrating practical policies. What opportunities are there to partner with Eagle County schools? What exploration is HX doing around V2G potential, which we talked about?
Yeah. Fred, it sounds like you may know more than the average bear. If you're a Holy Cross member, thank you for being a member. Holy Cross has looked at, in our most recent RFP, we looked for a solar and storage project, kind of like the High Mesa one that I showed, that would be in Eagle County, that would be on land that Eagle County schools had. Unfortunately, the bids that we got back in that RFP didn't quite pencil out the way that we had hoped. And so that concept is on pause for now. I won't say that it's dead, but I do think that that's a particularly good site for our grid and for Eagle County to help us build some energy resilience. And so I'd love to keep that conversation rolling, and to the extent that we see some opportunities to come back and have that conversation again. And then I think we talked earlier about V2G potential. The consumer vehicles seem a little bit more reasonable right now, by the way, on V2G. There's been a mixed bag of experiences with things like school buses. La Plata Electric Association in Durango tried to do this, found that it didn't quite meet it was an electric bus that was good on electric, but not so good on a bus, right? And we got to remember these vehicles have a single purpose, and that's to move people and freight. And if we don't do that, then it doesn't matter if it's electric or not, it ain't going to get used. So.
Excellent point. Next question is from Susan McFadden, and I'll say almost every question is saying, like, putting their hands together and saying, thank you, Bryan and the HCE team, for doing all that you're doing and leading the way here. From Susan, could you tell up a ballpark economic cost of 200 megawatts of clean dispatchable baseload resources today? 350 million or 623 million? You started in
Oh, yeah. Huh. Keep going.
Okay. You started in 2019, like many of our local utilities. How much have your prices increased over that time? What percent of your grid is DERS? Our goals hope to get 5%, but that seems very low. Susan, you packed 17 questions in there. That's awesome. I'm sure Bryan, good.
A ballpark economic cost. I'd rather speak in terms of per megawatt of capacity. If you look at what the market is doing, that's about $30 to $40 per megawatt hour. I think about Another way of thinking about it is what's a gas turbine going for today? That's probably the best ballpark because everything else will sort of converge to that as the marginal unit. I've seen gas turbines uh, what at prices today that are $2,500 a kilowatt hour, or sorry, 2,500 a kilowatt. So if I'm doing 200 of those, that's about 500 million. So I think you've bracketed it pretty nicely there with your low end and high end. I would say if your low end, your 350 is probably a 1750 a kilowatt gas turbine, and your higher end is more like 3000, which would be more indicative of maybe a small modular reactor or a new coal plant with all the environmental controls on it. But I haven't been in the big base load market for a while, so I'm just you wanted a ballpark economic cost and you got it from a non-economist. So there you go.
And if I remember correctly, in the January 21 Empower Hour, you had, I think, your finance guy or your really tech guy along with you. So we appreciate the ballparks. There's no way
Yeah.
to know all the details for everything.
Yeah.
Um,
I will say that the gas turbine price at around 2,500 a kW is about 2.5 times what it's traditionally been. And at least one major manufacturer of gas turbines has said you got a 5-year wait time before we'll even put you in the order book. So the notion of clean dispatchable is challenging to say the least.
so to pick up on that point, and we'll get to the Jim Gilbert question and RJ's question. When people out there say, "Hey, even with tariffs and with the clean energy subsidies removed, gas becomes more competitive and is available sooner." Like you as a buyer of lots of this, what's your perspective on that?
Well, if I were starting from scratch today, I don't know that I would take at face value that I could get a gas turbine quicker than I could get a solar farm. And if I'm looking at a gas investment that is potentially exposed to the fuel price volatility, and remember, we're energy dominance nation here. We're trying to export our natural gas to the globe. Well, our gas prices are $4 a million BTU, and the globes is more like 12 to 15 if you look at what's going on in Europe and in Asia. And so the non-economist in me is smart enough to know that when we start exporting to a market where the prices are higher, that's going to increase our prices here inevitably. And so now I've got a higher cost turbine. I've also got a higher cost for gas. So maybe that's not something I want to double down on if I know that I can get an admittedly higher capital cost resource, but with no fuel price exposure. And if I could get from a NextEra or an AES a wind project that might even be a part of a larger project we're doing already for PSCo, maybe I'd take that. I,
And
I think you've got to be creative and question everything, right? Don't just take the headlines as a reality. Because if they want to do business with you, they'll figure it out.
yep, okay. Thank you. Let's move on to James Gilbert. Can you give us a brief update or highlight on Holy Cross's community-based resilience projects stemming from the report plan delivered in 2020 with RMI?
Yeah. Thank you, James. We commissioned a report with RMI to look at the upper Roaring Fork Valley and what would have happened had we lost the one remaining burning pole during the Lake Christine fire. That would have compromised the transmission system, basically up valley from basalt. You guys talk about north and south. We talk about up valley, down valley because we're mountain people. Um, it would have been a bad day. We would have had 50 megawatts of consumer demand that would have been out for over a week with no real way to serve them. And by the way, it would have happened on July 4th, which interestingly is one of the bigger economic days of the year, including Christmas. But I digress. The point is, we've definitely leaned in with Pitkin County and with a number of the first responders to help develop a microgrid in and around the Aspen Airport Business Center and the adjacent Aspen Airport, powered by 5 megawatts of solar with also some battery storage investments that are going in, which will allow us to provide a few days worth of resilient power operations to the water and wastewater treatment to the bus depot to the airport FAA tower to the Pitkin County Sheriff's Department, the things that you really want to have in a pinch. And that's proved to be a bit more complicated. There's a lot that's been written about microgrid technology. But when you design a microgrid right now, you design it for a certain kind of mix of supply and demand resources. And the moment somebody says, I want to build a new building and I want to site it on your microgrid, right now you got to go and redesign the whole thing from scratch. And that's just not something you want to do. So there's a lot of work to be done in the microgrid space. I think technology and artificial intelligence can help us, but it's limited our enthusiasm for moving forward with that project and similar projects, which we anticipate will come off of our solar and storage projects like the High Mesa one that I showed.
Thanks. And related to that, does Holy Cross invest in not the government building microgrid approaches, but community center, private, like houses of worship, resilient centers, so that there are private places that when there are outages or it's very hot or very cold, the community, especially the disproportionately impacted folks, have a place to go?
Yeah, we would love to do that anytime a member of our community comes to us and says we'd like your help in doing it. Our community energy systems program that I referenced earlier will pay for all of the Holy Cross related costs to make that happen. So everything up to the consumer meter. We would love to have more of those. Unfortunately, what happens is the folks enter in not understanding more often than not the higher costs of the advanced technologies and the fact that they have to operate effectively their own grid. Whoa, 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 no, 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 right? And so I still think there's some opportunity there for us to figure out a way in which we might be able to do more in that space with financing and even some engineering and operations of the resource. And I want to be clear, a battery on a building is not a microgrid. A battery gives you more resilience, but it's not a microgrid that's capable of operating without the grid infrastructure as yet. There's technologies that are coming to doing that, but we're not quite there yet.
Thanks. I think islandable is a term of art that people use to say when a battery plus solar can work when the grid is down.
Yeah, you want to be able to also manage the loads and be able to match your supply and your demand locally for an extended period of time, and that requires a grid controller that's kind of in a very small can what our distribution operations center does with staffed people 24/7.
Yeah.
We're not quite there yet.
Yeah. Okay, cool. RJ, I'm going to do two RJ questions in a row. One, I'm going to follow up with his initial question about the BESS. From RJ, augmentation seems to be defined as adding BESS storage and components over the expected life of an integrated solar storage
Okay.
project.
Okay. Quickly on that, when we negotiate our solar and storage projects that are contracted to Holy Cross, we do so with performance guarantees. And if those performance guarantees aren't met, it's on the onus of the project developer to go in and whether it's replacing solar panels that aren't producing or replacing storage modules that aren't producing. We don't care how they do it. They're just contracted to deliver us a certain amount of power, a certain amount of capacity, a certain amount of flexibility over the life of the project. Whatever they need to do to augment it, that's up to them.
Okay, great. And then RJ's second question, which is another person has asked from email. You've stated before, not just tonight, that the state's NEM metering program is maybe dated. Well, how would you fix it? Like, how does Holy Cross build a vibrant rooftop solar energy program where people feel that not only are they getting a little back because they've made an investment, but they're also contributing to the power of the full grid. They're making the whole
Yeah.
grid better.
Yeah. Well, I think the key is, as you just said, Scott, compensating them fairly and appropriately for the grid services that they provide, right? The value of exported energy is variable in time and space. And I think one of the keys that we have to do is we have to be able to communicate that a lot of exported solar at 12 o'clock on a sunny day is actually harmful to grid stability. because we've already got too much of a good thing and we're having to liquidate it at a loss to the market. Even though the consumer never sees it, they ultimately do through the rates that they pay for the grid that they're using, right? Whereas if they could store it for a few hours, I'll pay them handsomely at 5 o'clock when my alternative is going to the market or going to XL and getting gas power at twice the going rate. And so that's the kind of conversation around where are those opportunity spaces? And then how do we get those incentives built together so that there's still a marketable proposition for somebody to invest in rooftop solar? And I think there we got to look at the cost side as well as the payment side. There's a lot of money being spent on marketing and customer acquisition and a whole bunch of inefficiencies in the interconnection process, not so much us, but other people. What can we do about that so that solar doesn't cost $4 plus per kilowatt of capacity, that it's more like what we see in Europe and Australia, where it's half that or even a quarter that? Then you can have a proposition that works with a 10-year payback like everybody wants to have happen. Right now, the reality is it's a 20-year plus payback for most folks, no matter what that guy on your front doorstep is calculating. The reality is something different. And I think it's unfortunate that people sometimes they get kind of sucked in by, not everybody, but some of the less scrupulous providers that are in our area.
Yep, that's great. A few more questions, and then I do want to let you go because it's getting late. One question that was emailed in from Ron Sinton. How will Holy Cross evolve its flexible demand responses to eventually have 24/7 hourly matching with renewables? Isn't Holy Cross currently optimizing to minimize the coincident peak for purchased power at present? How are those different?
Very different, Fred, very different. And I'm sure on the next Empower Hour, you will have a lot to say about this, because it's a great example of how rates define behavior. Economics defines behavior, right? What are you rewarding the investor-owned utilities with when you say you can earn revenue on your rate base, for example, right? What do? We optimize to reduce our costs. Our biggest costs right now are coincident peak in our XL wholesale contract. Over time, we will pay for voltage support, frequency regulation, our own ancillaries. All this will evolve, and we will evolve our programs to match that as well. I'm less worried about that because that we can control. I'm more worried about figuring out how to get people into those DERs that we want at every home and every business. Because right now it's kiddie stakes, it's kilowatts, not megawatts. And what we need to fill the white space is the megawatts. And so near term, it's how do we get people to adopt DERs and embrace them as ways that they can power themselves as well as others.
Excellent. And that leads to this one of the last questions, which is how effective have the DERS programs and demand response and load management generally, how effective has that been at Holy Cross for reducing peak needs?
Well, I'll give you one simple outcome. We have over 5 megawatts of installed batteries through our Power Plus program on the system, where we have basically committed to pay a monthly bill credit, a capacity payment that would otherwise go to somebody else. We pay it to our consumer for the right to use the battery. And then whenever we believe we're going to hit a coincident peak, we crank up all the batteries and discharge them. And we clip our peak by that 5 megawatts of straight away. And we save more money in doing that than we pay out. So it's working pretty well. Now I'd like to do that for all the thermostats and all the managed EVs that are plugged in and all the heat pumps and all the things, and make that 550 and then sometimes, 350.
That's the second part of that question. How much is too much? How much of DERS is too much where the cost effectiveness hits the peak and starts going down?
Well, I think we're not far away from that in terms of coincident peak only, which is we'll saturate on that. I think the bigger opportunity that lies for us is in market price arbitrage, perhaps, and what I would call kind of environmental dispatch, where we're seeking to dispatch DERs that have been fueled by or are themselves renewables so that we don't have to go buy or source power that has a fossil footprint associated with it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And
And then that's a willingness to pay question that frankly our board is just starting to wrap their heads around, because it's, as you can imagine, we don't have many precedent where we can turn to and say, hey guys, how did you do this? It's brave new world, but that's one of the things I enjoy.
Yes, you do, and we enjoy that you enjoy it. One more question. I see Mary's jumped back on the video, which means we're probably getting kicked off for the evening. But Mary, one more, okay? Um, maybe two more. And Brian, I sent you a direct text. Like, please tell me
I
where
know.
to go.
You know I love this though.
Okay, great. Then we're gonna keep going, and I'm gonna use every minute of it. And I'm gonna keep asking questions. This is from someone at Empower Our Future by email. We in Boulder talk about wanting competition in electricity services. Does Holy Cross feel this pressure too?
It depends on what you mean by competition. So I don't think we want competition with regards to the delivery infrastructure. You go back to those 1890 early electricity grids where you've got 10 poles and 12 wires going every which way on a street corner in New York. I don't think we want that. I think there will always be some element that we as a society want to be a monopoly, albeit a regulated monopoly, whether it's through a Public Utilities Commission or a board of directors like we have that's looking out for the people that we serve. I think there can be, and there is already competition, certainly at the wholesale level. As far as contracts are flexible and markets exist, you can shop around for the best deal for the kind of power that you want. It's not completely open, but I think that your providers can and should be doing that for you, and you should be conducting oversight to make sure that that's happening. And I think the PUC does a fairly decent job at doing that with the solicitations and how much do you own and how much do you PPA and what have you. I think where you all are very focused is on competition at the retail level. And the newsflash is you already have it. Because if you don't like what you're getting from your local utility, you can go out and buy DERs. You can put that solar on your rooftop. You can put that battery in your garage, or you can partner to create a community solar or storage array. People say to me all the time, "Isn't it great? You don't have." No, I have competition. The moment that somebody doesn't like what I'm doing, they can walk down to the Home Depot or the Lowe's, or they can call up the Sunruns of the world or the Teslas of the world, and they'll write you a quote and write you a check, and they might even finance it for you to take advantage of third-party financing that still gets the tax credit. If we don't do our jobs good, then there's lots of other options. And to kind of put a finer point on it, I had a conversation with a local solar installer recently that said he's picking up his projects and moving to Summit County where he can get a higher cost out of XL than he can for Holy Cross. And I was kind of unsympathetic. I'm like, I'm sorry, but you can't hold it against me. You can't hate me for doing a good job. Right? So I'm competing too.
Yes,
I want to compete for the right to serve you all as customers. Now, does that mean we throw open everything and the franchise agreements and the certificated territories are out of the window? That's a wild, wild west, and I'm not sure whether I win or lose under that scenario. But the reality is that we should all be asking the most out of the utilities that serve us, and holding them to high account because, as we've shown, it's possible to do it all.
and with respect to competition and VPPs, how do you feel about aggregated virtual power plants, third parties, companies who are aggregating DERs across regions, whether that's a company like Sunrun, whether it's a local contractor, or even whether it's a community like Boulder, building their own networks to compete with and provide services?
I honestly, I don't see any inconsistency with that. We solicited aggregated DERs as an option in our most recent request for proposals. We sent it to Sunrun, we sent it to Tesla. We said, hey, they, being big companies, are only working with big companies. So they didn't respond. So what have we done? Well, our Power Plus program, we're aggregating the VPPs and dispatching them and managing them ourselves. We're doing it in partnership with a company called Virtual Peaker, who does this for a living. And they say, well, we can do batteries, and then next month we'll add thermostats, and then next month we'll add, and whether it's Energy Hub or Virtual Peaker or Uplight or any of the others that are out there, there's plenty of folks that have the capability to do that, right? And there's nothing that's inconsistent with us contracting for them as a virtual power plant, just like we would contract with a NextEra or an AES for a physical power plant, a PPP, right? It all fits.
Would you encourage local communities, whether just neighborhood based or actually a city utility based, to take on that role?
Hey, I would absolutely love to have the conversation with City of Aspen or the City of Glenwood Springs, both of the municipals that are adjacent to us, or in Aspen's case, surrounded by us. I'd love to have that conversation with them on partnership. I think there's economies of scale to be gathered on both sides of the ledger. We have a conversation right now with a community leader who is collecting a number of developments that they're planning as they build out this town to have a lot more capacity. They're looking at 20 different sites and they're asking us, is it possible for us to have a coordinated build where all of these sites, even though they're physically disparate from one another, can be managed as though they were a single entity? And we're like, hey, let's have that. That sounds like fun. Let's figure it out. Right? At the end of the day, we've got to be responsible from a cost standpoint. We got to make sure that the thing works the way that we intended. So there's some technology risk, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't have the conversation.
And would you, as a utility, provide that VPP compensation for not just shift loading and not just charging at the least expensive times to go away from the peak, but also grid stabilization services?
We would pay for what those services are worth compared to where we might get those services from elsewhere.
Okay.
Right. And in some cases, we get some of our grid services for free as part of our overall wholesale power supply agreement with XL. So you might be pitching us, hey, we'll do frequency support for you. And we're like, well, we don't manage our own frequency, so we ain't gonna pay for that. And I think as long as you understand that that's the conversation, then I think we can have a
Yeah.
robust dialogue.
Yeah. A transparent conversation sounds like the
Yeah.
best way to go about it. So then you have two wins instead of a winner.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna get back to some of the questions that are in this chat because I want to make sure we hit those. From James Gilbert, if I understand correctly, your TOU program is voluntary, correct? In exchange for
Correct.
training, what support do customers receive in helping them figure out how to shift usage?
Well, to be fair, James, the time period for our TOU program is pretty well specified. And we do have a program staff of about 5 Holy Cross staff members that are available to help consumers with their opportunities. But what they actually do or don't do is entirely on the consumer. And I'm going to be honest, I feel like that's the only way that consumer-sided programs are going to work. I think we're all familiar with the examples of, I signed up for something and I didn't know that they could move my thermostat around by a degree or two, so I ripped the sucker out of the wall. Or, my wife insists or my spouse insists that I have a big red easy button to override the air conditioner throttle that gets activated on the summer hot days when it's 100 degrees inside. I think a lot of these program designs fail because they're seeking to compel people to be part of programs that actually don't make sense for them. And so we design first with voluntary participation and payment when that participation occurs. You don't participate, you don't get paid. It's the great American way.
Awesome. And you've also been very clear, you're very much looking at all these different programs from a purely not purely, but from an economic perspective, right?
Yeah.
The utility. Yeah. Okay. Next question.
But I want to be clear, Scott, that
Yeah.
the economics of my remaining white space are a lot more favorable to DERs than when I didn't have 88% renewables in my portfolio. The behavior of a utility now is to seek flexibility and to be able to call upon things only when and how I need them. And if you look at large scale, low cost generation, you can't fit more blocky chunks of power supply into those white spaces that are really spiky in nature. So I'm looking for things that are really boutique, and those come at boutique prices. And what that means is to go from 85 to 100, it's necessarily going to cost us more and put an upward pressure on our energy costs. And part of what the board and I are grappling with right now is, well, how far is far enough? And now that we do have to have trade-offs, does it make sense to invest in going to 91 or 92 when it might make sense to take that $1 million and go get a bunch of EV buses that we can manage flexibly.
Is it correct that Holy Cross does not sell gas, right? That's a different supplier throughout
We
the
don't. Nope, that's either Black Hills or XL in the Eagle Vale Valley.
as Holy Cross has programs that encourage and motivate the transition from gas vehicles, buildings, whatever it is, to electric, you got to wave your arms there.
I know. Finally, the blackout finally hit.
So
We may just go without it.
Okay, to listeners, Bryan has a motion sensor light in his office that doesn't actually see Bryan talking. So if he's flailing, it's just to get the light on. But it looks great. I don't think you need to flail. Gosh, I forget where is there conflict between Holy Cross and the local gas providers as you're providing financial incentives for people to make the transition?
So absolutely. And there's a lot of pushback from gas providers throwing shade or maybe gas light on Holy Cross's perceived lack of capacity to serve. One of the challenges that we get is, well, the grid doesn't have the capacity to meet all this electrification. Well, A, that's wrong, and we're going to be using some data to knock that down wherever and however, because we got lots of capacity given the way that people use energy in our area. Except for the 3 weeks around Christmas and New Year's, our system operates at 50% capacity or less, right? Because we're built for the holidays.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of room outside of those 3 weeks, number one. But number two, we also have the capacity to manage with on-site generation the energy demand of those new electrified resources so that we're not actually pulling more from the grid and we're not having to size the capacity if we do it in a timely way that's coordinated with development of distributed energy resources and that's done in a way with flexibility to match the availability of the renewables on the system. This is particularly appropriate and it hits in building electrification and also when we start talking about moving away from gas with these thermal energy networks. And one of the items that I think is a battleground yet to be fought upon is when a gas utility proposes to do a thermal energy network that is powered by electricity in another utility's electric area, who gets to do what? The commission kind of wandered into this in the clean heat plan family. And I know you have 2 power hours from now, you're going to talk about XL and gas and so on. I think some of the barriers to doing more of that gas to electric transition may actually turn out to be institutional and regulatory in nature. And I'll just leave it at that.
Awesome. Okay, great. Another question from Empower Our Future panelists is, it may have been too fast, but do you have specific programs that encourage people to kind of follow the sun with their energy usage to really charge and use the most electricity when the most renewables are on the platform?
We don't. As I mentioned earlier, our energy rate is a flat 11 cents in the default rate, 11 cents all hours, all days. I think at some point that is going to have to be a much more dynamic price that takes into account the local supply conditions for renewables, the local demand, the state of congestion on the distribution system, not unlike what you see in wholesale markets where you see locational marginal prices. I've thought for many years, going back to my days at NREL, that at some point that concept will come down into the distribution level and that you, the consumer, not you yourself, but your meter as your grid controller at your home or your business will see a time-dependent price signal and will instruct your devices to do the things that optimize your spend.
In the meantime, before all that happens, do you have any tools for your customers that tell them when is the best time to charge because it's the most renewable versus it's the most dirty?
No, that is a problem with data. XL, the white space, we don't know how dirty or clean the white space is until a month and a half later. We have the same challenge with the supply that we get from Guzman. At least now we know it's all 100% renewable. We just don't know from where or what kind of resource. We also have forecasts of each one of those resources, but then the actuals are guarded as market secrets because they could be used to infer market positions of people in trading markets. And so there's some difficulty with environmental disclosure in our power supply. You can do it easily after the fact, like the labels that the California utilities provide to their consumers. But we typically don't have that kind of transparency where I could say, 3 o'clock this afternoon, it's going to be sunny as all get out. So here's a control signal or price signal to tell you to your green orb is shining brightly on your desk. So run your stuff. Now's the time.
The question also added, like I guess was as an FYI, that Excel is recently providing a website that shows its forecast of when at night it's using wind versus during the day it's using solar. So Excel is starting to provide that information to the public
Mm-hmm.
on a looking forward basis. So it was just in the question. So maybe that's useful
Yeah.
for you guys.
So that's great. And I love that. And I'm going to go take a look at it because they're able to do it as someone who owns and has data coming from all their power plants. We get that from most of ours, not all of it, but I'm going to ask my team to see what they can do.
Great. We'd love to see the app. I'm a customer in the mountains, so I would love when I go to the mountains, know exactly when I should be charging my car and when I should be running my dishwasher and my clothes dryer and all that stuff.
See, Scott, at least you'd be one out of maybe 20 people that would just sit on your app all day. I don't know about the rest of them.
Well,
They'd be out hiking.
my wife complains, but sometimes it's for good. Okay, just a few more. It's totally getting late. Here's again, go Mary. Should I call it?
No. I am not in charge of when this ends. You guys
Okay.
are, hopefully Brian ate and has hydration. Brian, I just wanted to say thank you. Again, I wish I were in your territory. The programs are so innovative and cool and really exciting. We greatly appreciate your being here tonight and thank you. And I'll tune in for the continuation that I'm missing.
Thank you, Mary.
Yep.
Appreciate the
Bye.
opportunity. We'll see
One
you
more
soon.
question and one more statement, I promise. The question is, it seems to me that that Holy Cross has programs that could be adopted by an IOU also, such as bill financing, upfront costs of BE, pay for flexibility, encouraging TOU arbitrage. And the TOU arbitrage is one I'll follow up with. What are your thoughts on can the IOUs replicate the programs that you are building? What are the obstacles, and why aren't they?
So I think the obstacles primarily are regulatory. I will take note of the fact that XL has proposed an on-bill financing program for battery storage, I believe, in a recent filing.
Mhm.
Check me on that, but they are starting to move into the on-bill financing world. Remember that investor-owned utilities are all for the things that help them build the rate base and the rate of return on that rate base. And so if you want an investor-owned utility to do something, you give them the ability to earn a rate of return on it, period, full stop. And I think that if we start to look at DERs as the new rate base, I think that gets you the behavior that you want out of the IOU. But I also know that that gets you the behavior out of the IOU, right? And so there's a market power that we utilities inevitably have, whether we're small or we're large, that I think we need to be mindful of to make sure that we are creating opportunities for competition. In our case, we don't have a profit motive that it has to come from us, right? We do just fine if it comes from somebody else, and it helps us manage our costs to deliver affordable service to our members. So our incentive structure is, frankly, efficiency and cost minimization because we hear about it when the rates are too high, right? The motives are slightly different if you're an investor-owned utility, but there's no reason why those motives can't be aligned to the kinds of things that you want to have happen.
Yep. One example of this question was you mentioned earlier that your customers can fill up their home batteries any time of the day. They can discharge them any time of the day. And if they are a time of use, then there's a time of use arbitrage that is meaningful. Excel does not allow you to do that.
Yeah.
You charge your battery with your solar power, and that's pretty much it.
And you can only discharge that battery locally. You can't discharge it back to the grid.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And here's another example where net metering policies might need to be revisited, right? Because when we allow, right now, when we allow discharge of a battery on a time of use rate with retail net metering, we're paying 24 cents for that power. And there's a lot of other power supply one could have for less than 24 cents,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
But that's a consequence of the intersection of last generation's net metering policy with this generation's desire to get DERs and the flexibility on peak. So, yeah.
All
And
right. Well,
California's figured this out. Hawaii's figured this out. Other states are figuring this out. Surely we can.
is there a state legislative person who you know who is, I would say, the most effective at talking about this to put forth new legislation that could start helping the system kind of be more fair?
Yeah. Um, with regards to the net metering stuff, we took a heavy run at that with the help of the governor and the Colorado Energy Office and Governor Ritter as the facilitator and got zero nowhere. And I completely understand why the solar and storage industry was happy to keep the birds in the hand and do what they do. I think unless and until that changes, I would say it's actually a former legislator, Casey Becker, at COSA,
Mhm.
that has the opportunity to maybe lead that transition in policy to something that's more durable for the long haul, that's not subject to maybe a political whim in a future legislature that might think differently about it. Um, it's hard to know who the leadership on energy is in the current General Assembly. We were fortunate to have Representative then State Senator Hansen leading the charge on so many things, but as you know, he's now in co-op nation on the other side of the ledger, and that's been fun to
Yeah,
watch.
yeah. Okay. Do you want to answer a question about nuclear?
Sure, I think it'll be a short one.
Nuclear.
Yeah. Um, personally, I wouldn't mind having the opportunity to entertain that question. I think there's a lot of technological advancement that's out there. We've been running small modular reactors in our Navy all around the world for decades with nary a mishap, at least one that we know of. It's not classified. Um, there's every reason to think that it should be something that's possible. And yet, every time we try to build a new nuclear reactor, whether it's a large one like Vogtle or a small one like the one that was planned at the Idaho National Lab, the costs get out of control, the timelines slip, and the people that were like, well, you sold me on 9 cents, but at 29 cents, I'm out.
Yeah.
This is one where I'm not really willing to stick my neck out and be the first adopter. But that being said, there's perhaps a spot in the portfolio at some point if the community wants it. And that's a big if.
Yep, for sure. Two specific questions. What percent have your prices increased over time since you've taken over?
When I started in 2017, our energy cost was 9.5 cents a kilowatt hour. We had a half-cent increase right before we took the new goal in 2019 to 10 cents. And then in our most recent rate change, sorry, no, that was a full cent increase. That went to 10 and a half cents. And then in our most recent rate change last year, that 10 and a half cents went to 11 cents. And that's where we are today.
Okay.
So 9.5 to 11. And I think if you compare that to the cost of other goods and the cost of inflation, I think we beat it.
Yeah, I think somewhere on your website you say 33% less than the national average.
Right. Yeah. Colorado average is 14, national average is 16. And those are, if you are reading the newspapers and you are tracking utility rates, everybody's got a high single to low double-digit rate increase planned for next year. And
And for how many? And for how many years forward? Like,
I mean, a lot of utilities kind of bundle them all together and do it a big one at once, and then it's quiet for a while, and then a big one after that. I can't say that we won't have a rate increase, but it probably won't be on the energy side. It'll be more around the costs of providing the capacity to serve and the infrastructure that goes along with it. And I think people understand that as we need more capacity, we got to build more things, and that's going to cost more money, and everybody shares equally. And frankly, I think some of our rate work will remedy some of the historic cross subsidies that have existed in the past between big and little consumers and folks with and without, access to things. So,
Okay, that makes sense. And then there was a follow-up to the DERS conversation. We kind of answered it, but kind of didn't. It says, what percent of your grid capacity is DERS, and what should that be?
so that's a really tricky question to answer because you can answer it one of two ways. Our system peak capacity is 295 megawatts at the peak, and our installed behind the meter solar capacity is approaching 30 megawatts. So that's order 10%. But that's hugely misleading because the 295 is in the winter and the 30 is in the summer. They're apples and they're oranges.
Hmm?
A better way to look at it would be in terms of the energy. So how many kilowatt hours of what Holy Cross serves come from a distributed energy resource? And to go back to the chart, it's only the yellow area that is the exported energy from the rooftop solar if you're defining DERs as that. And that's 3%, 2 to 3%. Now, if you add on our distribution connected resources, the Pickens County Solar, the solar plus storage at CMC and Parachute and Rifle, then that number starts to be north of 10% with grid connected resources at distribution that we're not getting from outside our footprint. Um, that's probably a different definition of DERs than what most people think of, but
Yep.
they're distributed.
Okay, and my very last question for you, because we're almost hitting the double hour mark for the Empower Hour, is from Fred Kirsch, and he says, and I think it's representative of all, can you clone yourself and send and come to Fort, he says, Fred, I guess is from Fort Collins, so it says, and send Bryan to Fort Collins. We want you in Boulder, other folks want you in Denver. I guess that's just a way to say we really appreciate all the hard work that you and your team has done over the years. You've really stuck your neck out, made some, pretty ambitious targets, and maybe you knew that you could hit most of them early on, but it's going to be hard the next 5 years, and we all know it.
Yeah.
So we want to put a little steam, a little wind behind your back, and just say thank you, thank you, thank you, and come back to the community if you have problems that you can't solve. This Empower Our Future community. I'm so amazed every time I meet another person who's a physicist, a biologist, a chemist, a geologist,
Yeah.
PhD, an MA from all kinds of colleges. So we're a great resource for you. We shouldn't just be pulling, but we can give as well.
Yeah. No, thank you, Scott. I appreciate that. I'm going to answer Fred's question two ways, and I'm going to try to end on a little bit of humor. Okay. The first way is, what? There's a job opportunity at Fort Collins? And then the second is a little bit more tongue in cheek, and that is municipal utilities are well known for their tight-fistedness when it comes to compensation. And the people that you want, unsolicited advice, the people that you want are in demand in a lot of places that pay really well. And I've had more than a few opportunities to join the ranks of the municipals and even some investor-owned utilities where, quite honestly, it made no sense for me economically to do that. And so some of this, and this is not fluffing my own pillow by any stretch, it's a team effort. But some of it is you might have to be brave enough to invest in the kind of leadership that it's going to take within these companies to make the transition happen. Because what we haven't talked about at all is the work that we've had to do to bring all 175 of our employees along on the journey, many of whom were openly skeptical and outright hostile to the notion of what? We're going to abandon everything that is all good and holy, pun fully intended, that's gotten us here to where we are. We're going to throw that out the window and basically rewire the place. Well, yeah. Now they see the benefit of having done it, but it requires leadership on the part of boards and managers and a little bit of bricks from time to time from people that say you can't do it, and you got to persevere and you got to do it. And those people are few and far between. And I know a few of them, and they're all highly compensated. And it's going to take a motivated city council or a motivated municipal utility to recruit that kind of talent. Um, but that being said, you know, I would love the challenge of doing this again on a much bigger scale. Because as the climate scientist in the room, I'm pretty proud of the fact that we've taken 1 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents out of the atmosphere by decarbonizing Holy Cross. But that's 1 million metric tons in a 20 billion metric ton world. It's a drop in the bucket. And so personally, I'd love to have the opportunity to, play in the big leagues someday. And if you hear of one, let me know.
Well, we think Holy Cross is big leagues, even if you don't, because of the great work it's doing. It's at least an inspiration and a great example. And I don't know if there's a formal way to close these meetings because I've never closed one. But first of all, Bryan, thanks very much for staying and for all you've done. Second, to Paul and the Empower Hour communications team who set this up flawlessly. Thank you. And third, to all the folks who have stayed for 2 hours and committed themselves to this cause and all the great causes that you guys all fight for day in and day out. So I'll leave it with the big 3 thank yous.
Yep. In the words of my favorite bartender, I don't know where you're going, but y'all can't stay here. So have a good night. And thank you for the opportunity to serve and share and learn and love.
Great. Thanks, Bryan. Thanks for everyone for participating. Great questions tonight.
Bye all. Thanks
Bye.
again.
Wow. Yeah, fantastic, Bryan. That is so terrific to hear about all the innovations and programs you guys are doing, and all the progress in the last 4 years. So again, thank you, Bryan Hannegan, for joining us tonight. I also want to thank the other Empower Our Future communications team members who are integral to making these Empower Hours happen. Paul Cullen, Chris Hoffman, Steve Whitaker, and Julie Zonizer.